Yes, please.
Thank you for coming to the workshop this afternoon. My name is Tom Elliott. Let me just ask, how many of you were at the presentation this morning? So a few of you, looks like maybe a little less than half. I'll probably repeat a little bit then from the morning one just to kind of bring people up to speed without, I'll try not to be too repetitive so we don't belabor the point. This morning we talked a little bit about the state of the world. We went through some pretty grim statistics. I'll read a few of those. I think before we do that, though, we'll try that air thing again. We've all had some lunch, sitting back down now, and see if we can't get just a little energy moving. I guess by way of introduction, I should say I'm a rancher. I live outside of Livingston, raise black Angus cattle and low-line cattle, which is a miniature breed of cattle that are really highly adapted to grass-fed beef programs as a seed stock producer. I'm also a rider and an energy healer, completing my fourth year of the four-year program in energy healing, hands-on energy healing medicine. So all of those things sort of combined. I'd like to bring them all in a little bit as we move through this workshop. So I'd kind of like to start just by bringing our group energy together a little bit, maybe just kind of putting your feet on the ground, feeling that connection to the earth, open your chest a little bit, and feel like a laser beam of light going down through your feet into the earth, down to the molten core of the earth. Feel your connection to the earth. And as you do that, breathe in, take that air in, and feel that wonderful Montana air we're so fortunate to have relative to so many places in the country. Feel how that air moves in and out of your body and how it connects us, how it spreads through this room, how we share that common breath. Breathing in, breathing out, feeling our connection to the earth, bringing that on up into our body, and then expanding out a little bit to the person next to you and down the aisle to fill the whole room with your energy. Feel the container that we create here through our intention. It's nice to me. Feels good to connect in that way. It's a way that we can feel the sort of life force. I mean, the air is all around us. We're swimming through the air. We're sharing this air. We share it with the plants. We share it with trees. We breathe in the oxygen, breathe out the CO2. Trees and plants breathe in our CO2, breathe out the oxygen. What an incredible symmetry. Beautiful thing to be a part of in this universe. It's part of that life force that it's almost an erotic life force as you feel it move through these warm, generates heat, generates connection. It's a simple pleasure. It's nice to just sit here feeling that sort of deep unitive state of nature. So this morning we talked a little about the state of the planet. We talked about some of the grim statistics. The fact that 85% of the people on the planet are forced to live on less than 15% of the resources, with 800 million people going hungry every day, and 12 million children dying each year from malnutrition and related illnesses. 12 million. Every hour we lose 2.7 million tons of topsoil. 70,000 pounds of chemicals are released into the biosystem, and dozens of species are destroyed every hour. In the last 40 years, nearly 1/3 of our arable land has been lost to erosion and continues to be lost at a rate of more than 10 million hectares per year. Global sales of chemicals have increased ninefold since 1970. Childhood cancer in the United States is increasing at a rate of 1% per year and is now the second leading cause of death in children aged 1 to 14. Cancer. Testicular cancer has tripled, prostate cancer rates have doubled, and sperm counts have fallen by 50% among European and American men since 1950. That's in my lifetime. And of course, we all know that in 1960, breast cancer in developed countries would affect maybe 1 in 20 women at the most. Today, 1 in 8 will face this disease. It's a pretty bleak and frightening picture when we look at it that way, and we know this. And we talked this morning a little bit about what might be bringing out the worst in us. And I think this morning we really kind of went to the place of personal responsibility, of our own accountability. How this problem is, although we can attribute it to the economy, we can attribute it to transnational corporations, we can talk about the World Trade Organizations, but the cause of the problem is rooted in human fear, in our own greed, and in denial. Consumer products, cruelty, exploitation, pollution, all of those things are tied together in a complex web of the global economy. You can't touch one part of the web without affecting the whole thing. And I really think, again, this morning, we talked about how the root of that problem is the belief that somehow I am separate and independent of that web. We see ourselves in separation rather than unity. And that separation, to be in that separation, is to be in denial, because we're all right in the middle of the web. I had so many notes here, I just finally decided I had to get some of this stuff. I was going to read to death, so I think what I want to do today, this afternoon, though, is, we looked at the personal this morning. This afternoon, I want to begin to look maybe a little more at the larger economic system. And I want to start by looking more deeply at corporate agriculture, because because I'm a rancher, I have a real sense of connection to agriculture, and it's a passion of mine. So I'd like to look at the ways that corporations have created, and not just corporations, but this whole economic system has created a desolate system of agriculture that's subsidized by our tax dollars, that kills the planet, destroys families and communities, and alienates us from the earth so that we can produce dead food that poisons our bodies. Not a very nice looking circle. It's an agriculture that poisons and depletes our soil and water. It reduces the nutritional value of our food. It destroys families, family farms, communities, and it alienates us from the earth. It provides abundant and diverse food to the rich. It offers nothing to the poor. It's a desolate agriculture. It's a desolate earth. It's desolate families. The farmer is being systematically destroyed globally. In the industrialized nations, 98% of the people have been driven from the land. And that's the same model we're exporting to third world countries, where the majority of people are still engaged in agriculture. The huge cities of the third world countries aren't the result of overpopulation. They're the result of intentional policies that are urbanizing and destroying the small farmer. In Brazil, for instance, the conversion of agriculture from small landholders producing food for domestic consumption to capital-intensive production for export displaced 28.4 million people between 1960 and 1980. These huge corporations like Iowa Beef, IBP, or ConAgra, they report record profits, but they operate in a food system that's efficient only on the profit loss statements of the corporations driving the system. On the larger economic scale, they profit from the externalization of costs, such as energy depletion, land degradation, water depletion, and pollution, deforestation, loss of genetic resources, disintegration of rural communities, and of all things, malnutrition. Now that's not what Monsanto and Archer Daniels Midland supermarket to the world would say. We saw this morning Monsanto's version when we heard from Percy Schmeisman. But I mean, they have these beautiful green advertisements. You've probably seen them. Supermarket to the world. But a lot of that has been debunked. Bioneer Andrew Kimbrell wrote a great book called Fatal Harvest. Maybe could you click that next slide, please? Yeah, and then the next one. The 7 deadly myths of industrial agriculture. Industrial agriculture will feed the world. We've heard that. How many people have heard that or read that somewhere? Yeah, I mean, it's all over the place. Well, the thing is, hunger isn't caused by lack of food on our planet. Every year, enough wheat, rice, and other grains are grown to provide every human on the planet with 3,500 calories per day. Worldwide, 4.3 pounds of food per person per day, 2.5 pounds of grain, beans, nuts, 1 pound of fruits and vegetables, and nearly 1 pound of meat, milk, and eggs. Industrial agriculture creates a food dependence because it forces subsistence peasants off the land so that it can be used for growing export crops. Millions of peasants lose their land, they lose their community, they lose their traditions, and they lose their ability to grow their own food. Then you have urban and rural poor who are unable to earn enough money to even buy their own food, and so you have hunger. Furthermore, as farmers have to pay more and more for production costs, they receive less income due to increased yields. It's a cruel irony that as they grow the world's food, they can't afford to feed themselves or their families. In Africa, we have corporate agriculture producing cotton and sugar cane. Try to eat that. The second one is industrial food is safe, healthy, and nutritious. You look at a modern supermarket and it's a pretty shiny thing. It projects this illusion of food safety. It's neat, it's clean, it's polished, everything's colorful, shelves are well stocked, but things aren't as they appear. The Center for Disease Control reports that foodborne illnesses increased more than tenfold between 1970 and 1999. At least 53 pesticides classified as carcinogenic are presently applied in massive quantities to our major food crops.
Jeez.
Since 1989, overall pesticide use has increased by 60 million pounds. And the EPA reports that more than 1 million Americans drink water that's contaminated with pesticides from industrial farms. Infections resistant to antibiotics are now the 11th leading cause of death in the United States. Calories, processing, preservatives, and sugar contribute to obesity, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease. 20 years ago, the average teenager consumed twice as much milk as soda. Today, they consume twice as much soda as milk. And now we have irradiation to sanitize our foods. A food supply that's safe for the environment, that's humane to animals, and based in community is also a food supply that's safe and nutritious for humans. But that's all right because we know industrial food is cheap. At least it's cheap. Problem is, conventional analysis of cost of food completely ignores the staggering externalized costs of this industrialized food system. We spend tens of billions of dollars every year as a society in taxes, medical expenses, toxic cleanups, insurance, price supports, and other forms of welfare for agribusiness. The current system imposes huge costs on us and on our future generations through the loss of an irreplaceable biodiversity and topsoil. Food on the average American's plate travels an average of 1,300 miles from field to dinner plate. But that's all right, because we know industrial agriculture is efficient. 1989 study by the U.S. National Research Council concluded that well-managed alternative farming systems nearly always use less chemical pesticides, fertilizer, and antibiotics than conventional farms. They have lower production costs, they reduce adversarial environmental and health impacts, and in some cases increase per acre crop yields. Output per acre is far greater on small to medium-sized farms than anything you can produce in a single crop monoculture yield per acre. But we hear about yields per acre. There's no comparison. Relatively smaller farms are 2 to 10 times more productive than larger ones. Small farms in the 27 acre size are 10 times more productive than large farms of 6,000 acres or more. And extremely small farms, like 4 acres, can be 100 times more productive. But that's all right, because at least industrial food offers us more choices. When I was a kid, you went in a supermarket or the grocery store in my hometown, they stocked around 800 items. And we were pretty well fed. Today's supermarket stocks 30 to 40,000 items, and new products are introduced at a rate of approximately 41 per day. But when you look at the labels, it's really hard to find anything that isn't basically sugar, salt, hydrogenated oils, and small amounts of corn, rice, or wheat. What we get is new packaging choices. I mean, the reality is that 11 types of potato chips is not food diversity. But that's all right, because we know industrial agriculture benefits the environment and wildlife. You know, I can't even dignify that one by responding. But we do know then, at least, that biotechnology is going to solve the problems of industrial agriculture. You heard Percy Schmeiser this morning, and most of you did. Dr. Charles Benbrook, who's the former head of the Board of Agriculture at the National Academy of Sciences, ran more than 8,200 field trials on Roundup-ready soybeans, and he concluded that Roundup-ready soybeans produce fewer bushels of soybeans than similar natural varieties. A USDA study in the year 2000 revealed no overall reduction in pesticide use with genetically engineered crops. And finally, we have no assurance of the safety of those foods and no way to trace adverse reactions. So economists on corporate payrolls tell us it's the most efficient system of agriculture ever known. But it's efficient at what? You know, it's interesting. In Montana, we live sort of in a supply region. It's a region that primarily supplies commodities to distant cities or to transnational corporations. And supply regions often become these sort of economic grotesques because their economies are so disproportionately shaped by external forces. Sometimes you might call that a colonial economy because of its similarities to the colonies, where imperial powers typically shape the conquered territories into regions intended to supply a narrow range of resource goods. Well, we see that in Montana. And in some words, even colonial is too optimistic for our region, because that implies at least that if you overthrew the alien power, the local economy could thrive under its own power. But the shortcomings of our type of region go deeper than that oppression of a single imperial power. A healthy local economic system requires vigorous, innovative, interwoven relationships if they're going to become really economically resilient. Jane Jacobs says in a natural ecology, the more niches that are filled, the more effectively the ecology uses the resources it has available. And the richer it is in life and the means of supporting life. Notice I said effective instead of efficient. Nature is extravagant. Nature's not efficient, but it's incredibly effective. You take my sex life, for instance. I have some 2 billion sperm, but I only have 3 daughters. Now that's not very efficient, but it's incredibly effective. So we need these kind of capacities. We need to be able to develop these kind of capacities to develop healthy economies and healthy food systems. It has to be this open-ended system that's continuously inventing itself. But, next slide.
But the corporate global economy, you know, it's inevitable, right? Resistance is futile, you will obey. You get trapped by this collective trance. We talked about this morning as well. It's a trance that holds us captive to a self-limiting view of reality and of our own human possibility. It's a trance that strips us of our meaning in our lives. It mocks compassion as being naive, and it gives lip service to concern for the well-being of one another and the earth. We have to awaken to the reality that at some level we've given our lives over to this culture and the institutions of this global corporate economy, what David Corton calls a suicide economy. It's an economy that rewards us for destroying life, the lives of people, community, and nature in exchange for money. And that's a profound distortion of human values. The defining agenda of the era of this economy has centered on unifying the planet's territory and resources under centralized institutions with power to impose order in the name of peace and prosperity. Now, these institutions have contributed many benefits to humanity, but the dark side of their legacy is a world of tremendous inequality, violence, repression, and environmental destruction. You know, over the past 20 years, there's been this enormous shift in power from the institutions of the state to global corporations with economic resources far greater than that of most states, and with a global reach that places them beyond accountability. And this is no small thing. Transnational corporations now account for 1/3 of the total global output. Their annual sales have reached $4.8 trillion. The economy of Mitsubishi is larger than that of Indonesia, the world's 4th most populated country. Multinational corporations comprise 51 of the world's 100 largest economies. So proponents of corporate globalization hail this consolidation as sort of the ultimate victory of democracy and the market. Unfortunately, they mistakenly equate the rule of money with democracy and the rule of central economic planning by global mega corporations with the play out of market forces. Humanity has just fallen victim once again to a new variation on the age-old theme of tyranny. And these corporations use through their control of the mass media, they fabricate a materialistic, money-loving culture that's suited to their ends. There's no resource that can't be reduced to a commodity, and no person who's not a consumer. Now, it doesn't stem from numbers of people. It's not a population issue. It comes from killing the relationship of nurturance that communities possess. If you want to turn someone else's commons into your commodities, the first thing you have to do is destroy the relationship of nurturance and belonging within their community, so that financial power becomes cultural power. Now, apologists for this corporate greed and violence maintain that this is simply survival of the fittest. But contrary to the claims of these sort of social Darwinists, competition and hierarchies of domination in nature are subordinate to the deeper processes of cooperation and self-organization. These institutions, insulated from reality, they become power-holding elites, and they fail to realize the terrible truth that the institutions of their power have become instruments of humanity's suicidal self-destruction. We're at a fork in the road. We have two worldviews. In 1543, Polish astronomer Nicolaus Copernicus published a paper entitled On the Evolutions of the Celestial Spheres, in which he challenged the view that the sun revolved around the earth, arguing instead that the earth revolved around the sun. His alternative to the widely held other model, which had the earth as the center of the universe, led to a revolution in thinking, to a new worldview. Today, I think we're faced with two equally radical visions of the human future. We have the corporate empire, or we have what they call in India, earth democracy. One leads to global self-destruction through this sort of escalating spiral of violence against life and the devastation of living systems. And the other one leads to a new human civilization grounded in deep democracy and in the love of life. Earth democracy stands at the intersection between sustainable agriculture, sustainable community, and sustainable economies. Have you ever heard the story about the teenage boy, Native American, who goes to his grandfather and he says, "Grandfather, I have this terrible struggle going on inside me. It's like I have two animals in me. On the one side, there's this voracious, violent animal that wants to just consume everything. And on the other hand, I have this sort of loving, compassionate side that really knows and is mindful of its place in the web, I'm struggling, and I don't know which one's going to win. What do you think, Grandfather?" Grandfather thinks for a few minutes and he says, "The one that will win is the one you feed." And we're a little like that in society right now. I mean, individuals in society differ as to which one of the competing tendencies, domination or partnership, is more prominent in their lives. We know that both of these reside in us. So we ask, where lies the truth? Is the world inherently hostile and dangerous? Or is it inherently caring and compassionate? The answer is it depends on us. Because we have the knowledge today, we have the technology, we have the organizational capacity to create the world we choose. And we only need the vision to see the possibility of a caring and compassionate world and to choose to live it into being. And that's the insight that liberates us from the self-limiting and pessimistic belief that there is no alternative to the world of desolation. And guess what? We're not alone. We are participants in the largest, most international, and potentially powerful social movement in human history. And yet it's not identified with a single individual leader. It's a mutually empowering movement in which every one of millions of participants is a leader in his or her own right. Everyone sitting in this room is one of those leaders. Rather than mobilizing around an ideology, it's converging around an emergent set of values. And it gains its power from the fact that it's an expression of a deeply authentic set of values that flow from our awakening, from the awakening of a new cultural and spiritual consciousness that's deep inside of us. It points the way to the human possibilities. In particular, a previously unknown human capacity to self-organize on a planetary scale with an unprecedented inclusiveness, an unprecedented respect for diversity, for shared leadership, for individual initiative, and a deep sense of responsibility for the whole of life. This capacity for mutual learning that is just expanding, this capacity for consensus convergence and for global coherence suggests the qualities of an emergent planetary consciousness. And it manifests a human capacity for democratic self-governance beyond anything previously known. And we're only at the beginning. This conference is part of the beginning. This connection to conferences all over the United States and to the main conference in San Rafael, only the beginning. See, the goal of political democracy from our forefathers was not to create a more accountable monarchy. It was to replace the institutions of monarchy with new institutions that were appropriate to a democratic society. We need a similar approach to this earth democracy. The appropriate goal is not to reform the institutions of corporate rule. It is to replace them. And to replace them through an emergent process of succession and displacement, with systems of economic relationships that distribute power by localizing ownership and control. So the task ahead is both simple and it's profound. We have to transform societies dedicated to the love of money into societies dedicated to the love of life. We have to free ourselves from this sort of pathological culture and the institutions of this global suicide economy and withdraw from them our life energy, take it back, and live into being a life-serving culture and life-serving institutions. moving economy, of healthy markets that function as extensions of our local ecosystems to meet the needs of people, communities, animals, plants, land, water, and air. It's not that difficult at some level. The power and the legitimacy of these institutions of the suicide economy depend on the beliefs and the values of a dominator culture that denies the spirit and the human capacity for sharing, cooperation, and love. This dependence is their most critical vulnerability because it's fundamentally untrue. It cannot survive an awakening of consciousness to the spiritual underpinning of life and a human capacity to transcend our baser instincts. Margaret Wheatley says, once an emergent phenomena has appeared, it can't be changed by working backwards, by changing the local parts that gave birth to it. You can only change an emergent phenomenon by creating a countervailing force of greater strength. And that means that the work of change is to start over, to organize new local efforts, connect them to each other, and know that their values and practices can emerge as something even stronger. Those who claim that corporate globalization is irreversible are, in a strict sense, correct. But irreversible does not mean eternal. No system that destroys the foundations of its own existence should presume to be immutable. The inefficient, unjust, and psychologically self-destructive suicide economy is well secured against internal reform, but it is vulnerable to displacement through succession by emergent, life-serving, living economies. Economies that are attuned to the needs and well-being of a mature and healthy human community. So it's time to write a new story for humanity, a story that allows us to recognize that which is destructive to life and the actualization of life's potential, and to recognize our own capacity for goodness, for compassion, for understanding, and for creative engagement, and to reveal our ability to self-organize with a mindfulness of both self and the whole as we create truly democratic, self-organizing societies of people, animals, plants, air, land, and water. We are being called by the deep intelligence of creation to accept responsibility for the consequences of our presence on the planet. A responsibility not only for the well-being of one another, but for the planet as a whole. So how do we get to this new future? We talked a little this morning about how difficult it is to be a part of the web. I mean, the inertia of our system creates in each of us a life which is more often part of the problem than the solution, even for the best of us. We each compromise as we seek to meet our obligations to our families, to provide them with necessities and comfort, while knowing inside the causal links between the way we live and the suffering in the world we perpetuate. Even the most environmentally committed of us most likely conduct up to 90% of our daily economic activities within that unsustainable system, fortifying it with each and every dollar earned, spent, and invested. But the shift in our awareness is the critical beginning. It's the seed of a consciousness shift. And the point of our awareness is to raise the bar, first for ourselves as individuals, and then collectively to higher and higher standards, all while we're living in compromise. And if you focus too much on the results, you won't get the right actions. The questions and the quest to answer them are the best guides for our alignment. So what are the key points? What kind of leverage points can we look at? Next slide. Yeah, we can move on from that one. I think we've talked enough about corporations. I like D. Hawk's second law of the universe. Simple, clear purpose and principles give rise to complex, intelligent behavior. Complex rules and regulations give rise to simple, stupid behavior. So we want to keep it simple. We want clear purpose, clear principles as we move through this. And as we look at these leverage points. I'm going to try to just talk about some fairly specific leverage points so that we can then afterwards have a little discussion around these. Let's go to the next slide. This is a list of some of the key leverage points. The first one being waste. Waste
natural system, all waste is food for something else. Those of you who are watching the Gaviotas DVD there could see how they're using the waste products to create other industries within their community. But the extent of physical and human waste in our current system is both an embarrassment and it's a treasure of rich opportunities. We start with physical waste. Paul Hawken and Amory Lovins write in Natural Capitalism that Americans waste or cause to be wasted nearly 1 million pounds of materials per person per year. That's 1 million pounds of materials per person per year. And that doesn't account for waste generated overseas on our behalf. So now, while that may be hard to believe, they point out that the amount of waste generated to make a laptop computer, for instance, is close to 4,000 times its weight. 2 quarts of gasoline and 1,000 quarts of water are required to produce a quart of Florida orange juice. Financially, they point out that of $9 trillion spent every year in the United States, at least $2 trillion is wasted, meaning it represents money spent where the buyer really gets no value. So we need to eliminate the concept of waste. We know that in nature, the waste of one life form is the food of another. Everything evolves, and nothing is wasted. Gunter Pauli from the Zeri organization, let's go to the next slide, has done some incredible things with that organization in third world countries primarily, and also with Gaviotas. They're doing remarkable work in providing alternatives to poverty and environmental degradation by analyzing waste streams and then building value-added industries around those waste streams. I talked with Gunter this last September, had an opportunity to spend some time with him. And we talked about Montana, because Montana is a third world country in many respects. And he was really excited about some of the possibilities that exist in Montana for this type of application of his concepts. He looks at systems designed using what he calls 5 animal kingdoms: plants, animals, fungi, algae, and bacteria. So in this first slide here, we have a coffee farm. This is actually a coffee farm in Brazil. This conventional coffee farm uses 0.2% of the biomass it produces to produce your morning coffee. So the other 99.8% is waste, and either goes back to the environment as smoke when it's burned, or as landfill, as wastewater, or as caffeine-contaminated compost. Plus, the farmers, in spite of fair trades and Starbucks, thank you very much, live in abject poverty. So the next slide is that same coffee farm after a systems review in which they designed the farm to inexpensively create 6 diverse revenue streams from that same biomass. No change in the biomass. They have coffee beans, they have poultry, they have mushrooms, they have vegetables, they have beef, and they have pork, and it generates 0 waste in the end. It's totally utilized. And you can imagine what it does to the economic well-being of the farmer. Now, this isn't theory. This is being done today. You have decomposing plants feeding bacteria, which feed worms, which feed poultry, pigs, and cattle. Then you have biogas from the manure, which pasteurizes the substrates for growing mushrooms, which feed the people, and so on and so on. Let's look at the next slide. There's a couple other just quick ones here. This was actually Gaviotas himself when he first sort of became engaged with that community. Essentially they were pumping water and they wanted to plant trees. After several years of working with this concept, with the systems concept, go to the next slide, they created this incredible dance of materials and waste, which became food, which became waste, which became food, all of which create these wonderful streams of revenue for the community. So that today, Gaviotas is financially independent as a community. And that's in the drug-torn outback of Colombia. It's an incredible example of what our creativity applied using sort of natural systems design can do.
So let's look at the next slide. Another key leverage point is the role of money. Bernard Lightower, who's a distinguished professor and former central bank executive, he's one of the guys that helped design the euro, very interesting guy. He points out that money affects not only what gets valued in exchange, but also impacts our worldview and our self-perception. These money innovations can engender sustainable abundance within one generation. The key, according to him, is to introduce in parallel with the existing money system complementary currencies. Because the current national currencies are both a means of exchange and a store of value. That means, the money actually functions as a way of generating more money. If you put it in, say, a bank account that earns interest, it becomes capable of generating more money. And as a result, beyond the need to have healthy savings, you get money tied up in the system. People hoard money. Because when money can't circulate, it becomes scarce, and investment becomes more about making money than about generating goods, services, and new wealth. If you take the $2 trillion that change hands in the world markets every day, only 2% of those exchanges have anything to do with goods and services. That means that 98% of those transactions seek purely speculative profits that contribute nothing to the creation of real wealth. So to the extent that we can utilize complementary currencies to serve as a medium of exchange, but not as a store of value, then you can mitigate that dynamic of money. And there's a great history in the United States of complementary currencies. These flourished during the Depression, and they have over the years. As recently as the 1980s, there were fewer than 100 currency systems, alternative currency systems in the world. But we now see over 2,500 alternative currency systems worldwide. And they're quite interesting. The oldest and the largest complementary currency, the Swiss WIR, celebrated its 65th anniversary in 1999 with an annual volume of over $2 billion US and 80,000 members from all areas of the country. So these don't have to be tiny little coupon exchanges. These can be genuine currencies. There's some incredible ones in the United States. The time dollar one that they're using in Ithaca, New York, is quite an interesting concept. So you can imagine how a complementary currency could empower a population that may not have the financial resources in the existing national currency, but that have a lot to offer the community. And by using the complementary currency as a medium of exchange, then you can have businesses, you can have individuals that are committed to sustainability, accepting those currencies for goods and services. You could pay 60% of a meal in the national currency and 40% in the locally based complementary currency, for instance. Or a business could use the currency to partially pay their employees, who could then use them with any vendor who's part of the whole sustainability movement in the community. Now, there are also some great programs right now where they're developing these smart chips, smart cards, to do these alternative currencies. Very exciting stuff. So let's look at another aspect of money as a leverage point, and that is interest. Interest is an interesting thing. Interest doesn't have to be what we think of it today. I mean, this is something that's relatively new. And interest creates some very interesting problems. I don't understand it completely. But interest seems to fuel the need for constant economic growth, even when your standard of living is staying stagnant. And it discourages a sort of systematic competition among participants in the system. And it concentrates wealth, and it favors projects, even large-scale projects, that are focused on very high-yield profits, but very short-term projects. So there have been some very interesting interest-free banks that have cropped up around the world. There's one in Sweden that's a politically neutral savings and loan bank. It's a cooperative bank, which operates without interest. It doesn't pay interest, it doesn't earn interest. When your money goes in that bank, it goes in a form that allows you over a period of time to take money back out
in the form of a loan that is then repaid over a certain period of time, so that other people can also take out a loan. And that bank has over 18,000 members right now. It was formed in 1965. Their aim is to abolish interest as an economic instrument and replace it with less harmful ones. And what they use, they'll do certain fees that you may pay, but they're much lower than what you would pay in terms of interest. And there's not the cumulative effect, the compounding effect of interest. So let's look at the next slide. That's just back to our list. And the economic multiplier, I think, is a great thing. And this is something that most of us are probably aware of. It's the fact that the expenditure of $1 in a community generates way more than $1 worth of activity. So like a worker who gets a paycheck of, say, $500 might spend half of that on food and half of it on rent. The market that sold the food might use its $250 in revenue to buy more produce from local farmers or to pay the landlord, etc. The person that received the rent money may use his to pay the electricity bill from the local utility. So every expenditure that stays in the community cascades into a larger number of transactions that enrich the community. Now, once the multiplier leaves the community, the benefits are lost. So a community in which money flows out quickly and never returns slowly bleeds to death. That's what happens with the big box stores. The dollar goes there, and that's largely the end of it for this community. Whereas in your local businesses, that money can circulate and circulate and circulate before it leaves the community. I read recently about a study on a rural community back east that calculated that only 7 cents of every dollar spent in the community remained in that community. Only 7 cents. And it's no wonder that our rural communities are dying. Another thing we can look at is local efficiencies. There are lots of opportunities for local communities to support local businesses, particularly if the local people will commit to supporting them. For example, in 1910, for every dollar Americans spent on food, 41 cents went to the farmers, and 59 cents went to marketers and the providers of inputs like seeds, fertilizer, etc. Today, 9 cents goes to the farmers, 24 cents goes to the input providers, and 67 cents goes to the marketers. Those 67 cents, you can put the next slide up, those 67 cents are largely unrelated to the end product. And they're unrelated to what people want. It's wasted on packaging, refrigeration, spoilage, advertising, trucking, supermarket stocking fees, and various middlemen. So in a community, if farmers were linked more directly with people in the community, those efficiencies, those sort of inefficiencies, you can wring them out of the system. 67 cents of the food dollar could stay in the community. It could go to the farmers, so that the farmers could pay wages and the people could spend their money in the local community. Food prices could go down. I mean, it can work. As it filters through the system, it can have wonderful effects within the community. And those are local efficiencies. Nobody can duplicate those. Nobody can come in from outside the community and change that. It's a way of creating your own economic security within the community. And it can be tied to ecological integrity at the same time. Vermont did a study to sort of look at the input-output model to try to see where are the leaks in Vermont, where are the leaks in this community. And it showed that billions of dollars a year were leaking out of the state just because of insufficiently developed local business sectors. The absence of in-state banks, for example, means that interest payments on credit cards and other debts, in Vermont's case, it was exporting $241 million out of the state each year. I mean, these kind of leaks are huge. So let's see. Let's go back to let's move on up here to that one. I want to talk just before we get into this one. I want to talk about the media a little bit. We have to use the media as a leverage point in this movement,
Because we have the tools now to transmit a single idea to billions of minds at virtually the same moment. And this can be extraordinarily positive or it can be incredibly negative, depending on the ideas and the information that's put out. You know, in the United States, where you've got 98% of all homes having a TV set, and the average person watching more than 4 hours of TV a day, that means Americans watch approximately 1 billion person hours of television a day. So the alternative media in any form, or strategic use of the internet, all of these things are of critical importance. It's just all too easy to believe that the news and perspectives in dominant media reflect not only the truth but reality. And we know they don't. We know we have other ways of defining the collective sense of what's really fair, what's really possible. This slide just illustrates the distance food travels. I ran across this, and when we start talking about sustainability and sustainable food systems, when you have grapes that travel 2,143 miles to get on your table, I mean, this is just to get to the Chicago terminal, which is one of the major food shipping terminals for the United States. It travels even further from there. But you have one state supplying grapes. You have 7 from Mexico supplying grapes. The only thing in this survey that was being anywhere near efficient was pumpkins, which were only traveling 230 miles. I think really one of the first places we have to focus if we're going to build a living economy is on food. Sustainable agriculture reaches well beyond food production and rural living. People everywhere are a part of the land community. They're equally dependent on the land's fertility and just as shaped by its mysteries and its possibilities. I think maybe one of the most transformational things you could do today is walk down the street to the community food co-op and ask them, where are the products grown and processed in Montana, and then buy them. Because we vote 3 times a day with our food dollars. How we treat our food, how we treat our soil and our water is how we treat ourselves, and it's how we treat our neighbors, and it's how we treat our children. There's no separation here. We talked this morning about a different kind of world. A world of conscious and mindful prosumers rather than consumers, that are freed from the deception and the manipulation of advertising. A world that moves at a more relaxed pace with time for family, communities, cultural expression, and spiritual practice. A world of clean air and water, fresh, flavorful, healthy, toxin-free foods, durable products. A world that rejoices in its cultural and racial diversity. Cultures that nurture strong friendships, stable families, caring communities, and global cooperation based on trust and respect. A democratic world in which every person has a voice and an opportunity to be creatively engaged in contributing toward a better future for all. That world isn't going to spring into existence overnight. Like all living systems, it's got to be lived into being by its participants. It's got to emerge through a self-organizing process. But the process begins when we walk away from the dysfunctions of the suicide economy and we begin to reach out to one another to strengthen our relations among ourselves, our community, and our economy. And we've got a lot of the essential elements of a living local economy in place here in Montana. Look around. We have land trusts. We have local organic farms, farmers markets. There must be a dozen young people in this building right now who are raising crops organically in this local community. We have enterprises that are producing and marketing innovative environmental services and products. We have community-supported agriculture. We have local restaurants that are specializing in using locally grown produce. We have community banks. We have fledgling local currencies in the state. We have buy local campaigns, fair traded coffee, Jim Barngrover, You know, we have minority entrepreneurship program, we have recycling businesses, we have green business directories, we have all this stuff right here in Montana. It's here. We are already creating this. What we need to do is a simple thumbnail process. Let's go to the next slide. What we need to do, let's go to the next one, that's about Iowa there. We need to grow the network. We need to extend and deepen those webs of relationships that I just talked about. We need to ground it locally everywhere. That applies to individuals as well as living enterprises. And we need to encourage walking away from the institutions of the suicide economy by building relations with like-minded people and enterprises, and walking away from relations that strengthen the dysfunctional institutions. Let's go to the next slide. I had a girlfriend many years ago who said I had the moral fiber of a goat. Since then, I've occasionally pondered goats. I even ran some goats on the ranch for a short while. And my observation of goats is that they breed indiscriminately. And they eat things down to the ground. If you leave them unchecked, if you put them in a pasture, and you don't monitor them and keep them moving around, they eat anything. They eat everything. And they'll eventually destroy the place. Now, I've given up most of my goatly ways. But I have to ask, at some level, are we still goats? Are we still wanting to take it down until there's nothing left? I don't really think so. I don't think so. William James said that the greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. In the new physics, the basic building block of the universe is consciousness. Like Neo in the movie The Matrix, though, we know something is wrong. We can feel it in our bones. Once again, we're being called by the deep intelligence of creation to accept responsibility for the consequences of our presence on this planet. It's time for deep conviction held in our consciousness. It's time for a vision for a new future. A future that belongs to us.